the Holy Grail, Christianity's most desired object.
The Holy Grail is said to have been the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper.
Its power is said to be limitless.
We have something that could have devastating power.
But no one knows where it is or what it looks like.
It's explained as being the cup of the Last Supper, the bowl that was used at the crucifixion, a dish with powers, and a heavenly stone.
Throughout history, many claim to have found the Grail, but they've all been proved to be fakes.
If you examine them scientifically, none of them are grails.
But one man believes he has managed the impossible and found the Grail.
Once you start searching for it, your life starts to be transformed.
He believes the secret of its identity rests with a mysterious order of knights.
One way or another, this group wanted to pass the message to the wider public.
And his discovery changed his life.
It's a highly personal search. It's a lifelong quest. When things start happening in your life as a result of divine intervention, you change from belief in God to certainty in God's existence.
And he believes it can be found by anyone around the world. But only if what he has found truly is the Holy Grail. The southern United States, home to some of the most spectacular sights in America. But in the 1960s, it was a battleground for the civil rights movement.
We're going to march. We're going to walk together. We're going to stand together. We're going to sing.
One witness to the unrest is young Irishman Tim Wallace Murphy. He wants to be a writer and is searching for inspiration.
I wandered around the world for about 10 years. I think my excuse for bumming around the world was to find background for the great Irish novel.
We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll say, freedom, freedom, freedom now!
As he travels around the globe, he witnesses a world struggling to live in harmony. Something his family background in Ireland gave him knowledge of.
I had rather a mixed background. My mother was originally French and Jewish, who moved to Ireland to escape anti-Semitism. She married my father, who was an Irish Catholic. So I'm a Franco-Irish Yiddish boy who survived a Catholic education. And if you want to grow up spiritually confused, I can assure you that's a pretty good way to go.
After a decade-long trek, Wallace Murphy's quest to be a writer ends in failure. So he returns to Ireland with a new ambition.
I went back to university and qualified as a psychologist.
His new career path puts him in touch with someone who would change his life forever.
One of my clients described himself as a burnt-out writer, a wonderfully gifted and humanly flawed genius called Trevor Ravenscroft. We became very good friends. He was no longer a client, he was a good chum.
Ravenscroft tells Wallace Murphy all about a book he has written.
He'd written a book which became a sort of cult classic. It was called The Cup of Destiny.
The Cup of Destiny explores the legend of the Holy Grail, As Wallace Murphy reads it, he is fascinated by the secrets this relic might hold, but he's hungry for more. What exactly was the Grail, and where is it today? Jerusalem, where Jesus meets with his disciples before his arrest and crucifixion, and where the legend of the Holy Grail begins. Before his crucifixion, Christ gathers his disciples together.
On the night before the crucifixion, where Jesus breaks bread and shares it with the disciples, and then where he pours wine into the cup, and it's that cup which is the Grail.
For most people today, the Holy Grail is the cup or chalice that was used at the Last Supper by Christ.
This would be one of those vessels which was filled with wine and then passed from hand to hand and shared with the disciples.
The Grail legend also speaks of the crucifixion of Jesus. It mentions Joseph of Arimathea, a friend of the family.
Joseph of Arimathea acquires the cup from the Last Supper and then takes it and is physically present at the crucifixion and uses it to collect Christ's blood.
Legend says that the Grail's close connection to Christ imbues the Holy Grail with special powers.
Once it had held the blood of Jesus, it then becomes a source of healing and blessing and goodness.
This relic is reputedly to have miraculous powers. It can be curative. It can be transformative. It can virtually give you the gift of almost eternal life.
Wallace Murphy is intrigued by the power the Grail may possess. If uncovered, it could change the world. But finding it won't be easy. The Holy Grail may be Christianity's most desired relic, but it's also its most elusive. Valencia, Spain. Wallace Murphy learns that inside the city's medieval cathedral is a famous treasure. A chalice, a cup studded with jewels. Many claim that this cup is the Holy Grail, the authentic cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper. They point to the fact that many popes have used this chalice to celebrate the Eucharist. It was even used by Pope John Paul II.
And there's a wonderful picture of him kissing the chalice, and then a bit later he was able to use it at the celebration of Mass.
But Wallace Murphy discovers that the chalice in Valencia Cathedral is just one of hundreds of cups vying to be the true Holy Grail. Claiming ownership of the Grail in medieval Europe was good for business.
if you let it be known that in your abbey or in your cathedral you have the Holy Grail, pilgrims will flock to the town, and there will be queues of those who are anxious to give money to your church. And if you have an old sacred cup hidden away among the treasures in your church, awfully tempting to say, well, we don't know where this came from, but it's possibly the Holy Grail.
Wallace Murphy also realizes that the cups that are reported to be the Holy Grail have one major flaw: their appearance.
The way that the Grail is portrayed as a chalice covered in jewels, made of gold or silver, it is something that a king would have. Well, this is very unlikely to have been something that Jesus would have had.
I think we might almost argue that the more elaborately bejeweled and encrusted with treasure a so-called Holy Grail is, the less likely it is to be the one when Jesus established the Mass. That would almost certainly have been a simple wooden cup.
Some experts even doubt if the cup at the Last Supper was regarded as special at the time.
You really have to kind of go back to what happened at the Last Supper. And there is this rather hopeful notion that somehow they all understood what Christianity was going to become 2,000 years down the line, which actually, if you read the Bible text, they didn't. They were very confused about what was going on and very despairing about what was going on. The thought that one of them thinks, this is a sacred object, we must hold on to it. I don't mean to be irreligious, but it's just not really all that credible.
Wallace Murphy seems to have hit a dead end in his search for the Holy Grail. So he turns to the Bible for clues. He finds that the story of the Last Supper never once mentions a Holy Grail. It doesn't even say that the cup of the Last Supper was special. So he turns to the story of Joseph of Arimathea, collecting the blood of Christ on the cross. Not a word about a holy cup or grail either. It's clear to Wallace Murphy that the legend of the Grail is not in the Bible. So where does it come from? (13th century France). Wallace Murphy's search for the Grail leads him to the court ladies of Paris. They have a new favorite pastime. It's not dancing, but reading. They're enthralled with a text which tells the story of handsome knights on a quest for a mysterious object. It's called the Vulgate Cycle.
There are a series of 5 romances, Vulgate because they're written in French, not Latin, the vulgar tongue. The Vulgate Cycle, it's all about knighthood, but it's also about moving towards a different world.
Wallace Murphy realizes it is this text which links the cup at the Last Supper and Joseph of Arimathea with the Holy Grail. But Wallace Murphy notes that this wasn't the first Grail story, and the earlier poems didn't depict the Grail as a cup. Bavaria, southern Germany. Wallace Murphy discovers that this was the source of another version of the Grail poem, Parzival.
There's a German version under Wolfram of Eschenbach, who's a German knight and also a poet.
Parzival was written about a few decades prior to the Vulgate cycle. Wallace Murphy notes that while the stories of knights searching for the Grail are similar, there are some significant differences. In this earlier version, the story is not focused on Christ or Joseph of Arimathea. In fact, there's not even a mention of a cup.
For Wolfram, the Grail is not a cup, it's a stone. And it's a stone which falls from heaven. It's a marvelous thing. The power of the stone is increased every year because a dove comes down with a little wafer and puts it on top of the stone. And that reinvigorates the Grail.
Wolfram's poem doesn't give any more clues about the Grail. And anyway, no one has ever found this mythical stone. As Wallace Murphy continues his research, he discovers there is an even earlier Grail poem. And in this text, the Grail takes yet another form. The Champagne region in northern France. Today it's known for its sparkling wine, but in the Middle Ages, it was famous for being the birthplace of Chrétien de Troyes.
Chrétien de Troyes is the first one who writes about the Grail, and he writes about it in about 1190.
Chrétien's poem Percival, the story of the Grail, was composed around 20 years before Wolfram's Parzival. Wallace Murphy hopes that Chrétien's version, the original Grail text, may give him a stronger clue to the true identity of the Grail. In Chrétien's poem, Percival sets off on a journey to become a knight. His travels take him to a castle where he is greeted by the Fisher King. It is here Percival witnesses a mystical procession.
He finds himself in a beautiful castle with a very strange host who is lame, and a marvelous procession comes across. And he sees a lance, a sword, and crucially, a young woman holding something which is called un Graal, the Grail.
He speaks simply of a large golden dish that within it has the power to sustain. And what it has within it is not food, but one holy mass wafer.
After his whistle-stop tour of Grail legends, Wallace Murphy is more lost than when he started. The Grail could be any of the objects depicted in the poems. Would he ever find the Grail? Then, one evening, Wallace Murphy finds a clue in an unlikely place: his television.
When I saw that wonderful man, Professor Joseph Campbell, being interviewed by Bill Moyers for a superb television series called The Power of Myth.
It is a mystery transcendent of all human research, the source of life. What is it?
The documentary marks a watershed in Wallace Murphy's search. It makes him see that the Grail is nothing to do with a relic and its miraculous powers.
Campbell said it wasn't just about a search for a relic. He said, why should any medieval knight, however devout, go and search for a relic, however holy, when if he wanted a miracle, according to the belief system of the time, all he had to do was cross the road, go to church, and take communion. And he would partake directly of the body and blood of Christ.
It is now that Wallace Murphy realizes that the Grail stories are not about a relic. But if it isn't a relic, then what is it? Wallace Murphy goes back to the original Grail myths. He's looking for a kernel of truth, a clue to some tangible history that will reveal the secret of the Grail. Looking through the second oldest Grail story, Parzival, he discovers that its author wasn't just a talented poet. Wolfram von Eschenbach was also a knight. And not just any knight. There are hints that he was a member of the legendary order of medieval knights, the Templars. Wallace Murphy is intrigued by the possible link between the mythical Grail Knights and the historical Templar Knights. He spots that the Templars rise to prominence in the 12th century, exactly the same time as the Grail poems.
The real flowering of Grail literature between about 1190 and 1275 has as its background the Templars at their most powerful in terms of military might.
Wallace Murphy also notes that just like the Grail Knights, the Templar Knights don't fight for glory or power. They fight for good.
At this time when Wolfram is writing, they are an ideal of knighthood. They're a true Christian knighthood who are not selfish, but they're altruistic. They look after society.
But what clinches it for Wallace Murphy is the fact both bands of knights share the same uniform.
Wolfram von Eschenbach, when he's writing about the knights who guard the Grail castle, he does something very, very unusual. He describes the Knights Templar. He describes them as white-clad, and that would automatically have made everyone think of the Templars, because they were the only knights who wore all white. It was their uniform of purity.
All these links persuade Wallace Murphy that the story of the Grail Knights are in some way based on the exploits of the Templar Knights. Maybe it's not the poems, but the Templar Knights themselves that hold the secret of the Grail. Jerusalem, the 12th century, the aftermath of the First Crusade. The Knights Templar are formed to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land.
In 1099, Christian armies seize Jerusalem. The whole of Christendom is elated. But quickly, the dream turns to a nightmare, as logistically keeping hold of the Holy Land is very difficult. So a knight comes forward and says, I want to found a knighthood, and we will devote ourselves to protecting pilgrims here in the Holy Land.
For Wallace Murphy, the presence of the Knights Templar in Jerusalem is potentially very significant. This is the first time in 500 years that Christians are in control of the land where Jesus was crucified. If any secrets or treasures from the time of Christ were hidden, then they may still be in Jerusalem. And if they are, the Templars are better placed than anyone to find them. Their headquarters are in the holiest place in the city, the Temple Mount. Today the site is dominated by the Dome of the Rock. But in ancient times, it was the site of the Temple of Solomon.
King Baldwin II of Jerusalem gives them his royal lodging, which is on the Temple Mount. It's the building the Crusaders called the Temple of Solomon, because it's supposed to be on the site of Solomon's temple. While the Templars are at Temple Mount, it's a vast space and they have much to do. It's their military headquarters and it's their administrative headquarters. So they rebuild it.
They dug a shaft through the rock of the Temple Mount, a shaft over 90 feet deep, and created a series of radiating tunnels beneath it.
Most scholars doubt that there was anything sinister about the digging.
There are many stories of them digging under Temple Mount. This doesn't have to be for the Holy Grail or for the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon's stables is an area that can still be seen, and there's no doubt that they did hollow it out, use it, develop it, and it became part of their headquarters.
But Wallace Murphy believes that the Templars were digging for a specific reason. And there are rumors that during these excavations, the Templars find something.
They knew what they were looking for, and they knew where to dig. And when they found it, they scurried back to Europe.
If the Templars did find anything under the Temple Mount, they never said. La Rochelle, a seaport in France. During the 12th century, it was a port used by the Templars returning from their overseas expeditions. Wallace Murphy doesn't know for certain what the Templars brought back to Europe, but he suspects it must have been something valuable. For in no time at all, the Templars become one of the richest orders in Europe.
They benefited from ordinary people giving them money. Over the course of 200 years, something happens. They become very powerful. They amass huge wealth.
They became, very rapidly indeed, what we would call a multinational conglomerate. They had holdings from Poland in the north to Minorca in the south, from England and Scotland and Ireland, right across Europe to the Holy Land.
And it's not just wealth. The Templars received the blessing of the Pope.
He gave them privileges that nobody else had. It made regular monks and friars and priests and bishops very angry, and there was a huge amount of jealousy.
With the blessing of the Pope and their many riches, the Templars become far and away the most powerful order of knights in Europe. Wallace Murphy is intrigued. Had they found the Grail? '14th century medieval France. The country is ruled by King Philip IV. The Templars are at the height of their powers. If they know anything about the Grail, they play their cards close to their chests. But the Templars don't last forever. After 200 years as the darlings of Europe, public opinion begins to shift.
There are increasing reports and tales of abuses by the Templars and of hostility by the ordinary populace. The Templars do get a little big for their boots, and by the time the Crusades are coming to an end, the Templars, with their visions of knights and castles and battling in faraway lands, is something that Europe is a little tired of by the end.
The shift in attitudes is a golden opportunity for King Philip. After financing many wars, the king is bankrupt. And the only way to restore his fortune is to steal it from the Templars.
The way he did it was to turn public opinion against them, even further than it had already turned, by saying that they were guilty of blasphemy, of heresy, of secrecy, of sodomy, of all the things that the medieval world, publicly at least, was shocked by and abhorred.
The king sees his chance and wipes out the Templars.
Philip issued secret orders to all his local royal representatives around France to burst into Templar commanderies all over France early in the morning of Friday the 13th of October 1307. And for many people, the date of Friday the 13th is still remembered as a particularly unlucky one.
They were arrested, charged with heresy and given over to the tender care of the Inquisition. They were disbanded by the Pope on the grounds that the order had fallen into disrepute.
Wallace Murphy examines whether anything is found in the possessions of the Templars that might shed light on the Grail. When Templar properties across France were raided, no Grail was ever found in their possession. For Wallace Murphy, this can mean only one thing. The legendary quest for the Grail has nothing to do with any material object. The Grail, if it is real, must be a more intangible treasure. Maybe it is an idea.
When we think of an idea as being a thing with substance, it can be far more powerful and far more potent than any physical object. If the Grail is actually an idea, then we have something that could have real power.
Wallace Murphy wonders if the heresy for which the Templars were put on trial might itself be the Grail. Heresy is a common accusation in the medieval era. The 14th century church are merciless in their suppression of other beliefs.
The church is everywhere in the period. The church is the guardian of the afterlife and the enforcers of what people should be doing in this life.
Any deviation from the strict teachings of the medieval church is met with torture and death. And the church pushed the Templars hard to confess their heresy.
The church is a very bureaucratic organization, and the trial documentation is massive. There are on record first-hand accounts given by the knights of what they saw in the Templar order. Most of them saw nothing unusual, but there are a handful who do give evidence that is unsettling.
One accusation is that they held a shocking initiation ceremony that went directly against the rituals of the church.
It's beyond doubt that there was an element in their reception ceremony when they welcomed a new knight in and initiated him that required the knight to deny Christ and to spit on a crucifix. When you think of the medieval world in which they lived, a world where the Inquisition hunted out non-orthodox behaviour, those are very serious things to have been found to have happened.
The trial records reveal no clues to what the Grail might be. Wallace Murphy wonders if the Templars might have hidden the secret of the Grail in their churches. The Temple Church in London, England. Outside, a column topped by a knight on his horse. Inside, the tombs of famous Templar knights. Although the order of Knights Templar came to an abrupt end in the 14th century, their legacy survived in numerous churches across Europe. Wallace Murphy explores these churches for any secret signs of the Templar heresy.
Most Templar churches are incredibly plain, but there are certain diagnostic signs which do indicate a Templar church.
Whereas traditional medieval churches are full of statues and paintings of Christ, the iconography of Templar churches focus on the Virgin Mary.
All Templar churches, 90% of Templar churches, were devoted to the Virgin Mary. The Templars had a special reverence for the Virgin Mary, for Our Lady, so churches were dedicated to Our Lady. The Knight Templar took his vows in the name of the Virgin Mary.
Although the worship of Mary was different from standard church teaching, it was not a medieval heresy. Many churches across Europe paid homage to the Virgin Mary. But perhaps there was more to the Templars' devotion to Mary than met the eye. The 13th century Cathedral of Chartres in France. 60 miles southwest of Paris, its Gothic architecture has made it a World Heritage Site. It's been a magnet for pilgrims down the ages. But for Wallace Murphy, Chartres Cathedral may hold clues to the true nature of the Grail. Small details in the architecture make him suspect that Chartres was inspired by Templar influences.
At first, it looks like an orthodox teaching of Catholic dogma, which it is, and a very beautifully designed one. But over the main tympanum, there's a carving of Jesus, enthroned in glory, with hand raised in blessing.
On the face of it, it's another medieval carving of Jesus. But Wallace Murphy is intrigued by the cross behind the head of Jesus.
The sign of his divinity is the cross within his halo. But it's not just any cross.
Its shape is very similar to the cross the Templars wear on their scabbards. Wallace Murphy believes that this cross is a sign that the Templars were involved in the construction of this cathedral.
When you're financing a building of a place, you get to say what goes where. It's simple as that.
Had the Templars hidden the Grail within this cathedral? Wallace Murphy goes inside. As he explores the interior of the cathedral, he finds something. A statue of the Virgin Mary. It's known as a Black Madonna.
In that same cathedral, you have 3 Black Madonnas.
The Virgin Mary is normally depicted in white skin tones. But here in Chartres, and in hundreds of medieval churches across Europe, Black Madonnas are found.
The classic ones are 12th century, about 30 centimeters high, and sitting absolutely straight with the infant Jesus on their lap, looking straight at you.
The Black Madonnas are striking, even beautiful. But the Catholic Church struggles to explain why they differ from the traditional Madonnas.
I think from my experience that when you ask questions about her, the Church tends to say, oh, People didn't know what Jews looked like in those days, and so they thought they might be black. She's been a puzzle to the church and an embarrassment to some extent.
Now, if you ask the church authorities, they say they're black because of candle smoke. What a lot of arrant nonsense.
For Wallace Murphy, this may be the breakthrough he has been searching for. There are rumors that the Black Madonnas are said to be linked to the Templars.
They're very much a symbol of the 12th century. The Templars were supposed to have brought many of them back with them in their saddlebags.
Wallace Murphy wonders if the Black Madonnas are somehow linked to the Grail. Is the Grail perhaps connected to women? Some believe that in the Parseval version of the Grail legend, the quest is motivated by none other than a damsel.
It seems in Wolfram's Parseval that they responded to a call, and it was usually a call to go and rescue some woman. So it's very connected with the feminine principle.
But if the Grail was about the feminine principle, then what was it about it that was so cherished by the Templars and so feared by the Church? Wallace Murphy looks for clues in the symbolism of the skin tones of the Black Madonnas. In the West, the color black has a negative meaning.
We talk about black market and black currencies, things that are underground and secret.
But in antiquity, black has very positive associations.
In the Egyptian tradition, black is the color of wisdom, which is what enlightenment is all about.
The Black Virgin is darkness, she's underground, but she's also the Virgin of light. So she's the light in darkness. She's the alternative Christianity.
Wallace Murphy believes what the Black Madonna represents is what he has been searching for. For him, this cracks the mystery of the Holy Grail. Wallace Murphy believes that the Templars supposed there was more wisdom in the Virgin Mary than in Jesus Christ. For a church ruled by male priests, that was heresy, and it didn't like the idea of people searching for wisdom on their own. No wonder the Templars were hunted down.
One way or another, this group wanted to pass the simple message of spiritual enlightenment to the wider public.
Wallace Murphy believes that the Templars knew spiritual wisdom was a dangerous idea, so they hid it in the symbolism of their churches, but also inside poems, so that their beliefs could survive and teach future generations.
Chrétien Latour was trying to encode in his story part of their belief system. I think the invention of the Grail sagas was the masterstroke which helped preserve Templar teaching.
But if the Grail was wisdom, what exactly was the wisdom the Templars worshipped? The Freemasons' Hall in London, England. Meeting place for an international organization with secret ceremonies. Wallace Murphy believes the Freemasons may have a link to the Templars. As he researches both orders, Wallace Murphy finds many similarities. Both contain secret initiation ceremonies. The Templar founder married into a family credited as leaders of Scottish Freemasonry. And one of the highest ranks in Freemasonry is the Knight Templar. But the problem is that the Freemasons only came into existence 300 years after the Templars' demise.
Many people have posed the question, how did so much Templar teaching and influence go into Freemasonry? When the Templars were suppressed in 1314, and Freemasonry, as we now know it, didn't arrive until the early 17th century. And the answer is, the families who founded the Templars got the message and kept their heads down for the best part of 3 centuries.
But if Templar belief survived in Freemasonry, what does Templar wisdom, in other words, the Grail, look like in practice? From its beginning, Freemasonry has been founded on 2 principles: brotherhood and charity. Everything about their symbols and rituals was designed to foster those basic ideals.
And has been preaching its method of inducing good men to become better by myth, allegory, and ritual ever since.
Wallace Murphy believes that in modern-day Freemasonry, we can glimpse the moral principles at the heart of the Knights Templar.
The basic principle is to create a world of brotherhood on the foundations of truth and justice. And you take a look around the world today and say, we don't need that.
And for Wallace Murphy, the most gratifying discovery is the realization that the message of the Grail can be adopted by anyone.
You don't have to be a Knights Templar or a Freemason to do it. We can all do it. If we can get back to basic spiritual principles and practice them, the simple things, compassion, love, and service, behave to one another as brothers, remember that irrespective of our race, color, or creed, we are all children of the same God, and behave with brotherhood, with compassion, and with justice, we could transform this world.
It's a noble vision of the Grail, but one which challenges the accepted views of Grail experts.
Theories and connections between the Templars and the Holy Grail are enormous fun. They're great fun to read on a winter's evening, but nobody should confuse them for historical fact. As a historian, it's very hard to relate the Grail back to the Templars, so it's very hard to give these theories any weight.
It is an enormously compelling image because there's enough to kind of see the shape, but not enough to absolutely say that's what it is and it can't be anything else. And of course, this is what's very, very attractive. You can remake the Grail into not quite anything you want, but into this huge range of things, all of which symbolize something good, something that is going to transform our lives.
But for Wallace Murphy, the fact that his search for the Grail transformed his own life is itself proof that the quest for the Grail is real.
Transformative change doesn't have to be massive and dramatic. In my case, it's been continual and marginal, but enough to make an enormous difference. I go to bed at night with a smile on my face and a clear conscience. I woke up this morning thinking, whoopee, another day, what's in it for me? How can I serve? And from that flows inner peace and the courage and the commitment to keep going. That's available to anybody from any culture at any time who seeks it. That is the essence of the Grail quest.